I have a very special guest with me today. He's someone that I've gotten to know through music, actually, but he is not known for music. He has had an amazing career in film and TV. He is the writer of my favorite show, the showrunner of Billions. And it's kind of funny because we met on TikTok randomly. And I just had DM'd you and I said, "Hey, Brian, like your show's my favorite show in the world." And you hit me back and we shared some music and found out that you wrote songs and I wrote songs and we kind of connected that way. But the list goes on for you in terms of your accomplishments. If you just start Googling Brian K.O., he'll pop up and you can read all the movies and shows and amazing things he's been a part of. But thank you for being on the podcast here today with me.
I'm glad to be here with you, man. The algorithm, I guess, surfaced each of us for the other because, you're a great guitar player and songwriter, and somehow we mutually were interested in what the other one was talking about or doing. And it was during pandemic, I think, right, when we first wrote a song together. And it's my pleasure to be here with you talking about all this stuff.
I was thinking, what would Brian have asked or wondered when he was my age? I kind of wanted to talk about mental health because you're into TM. And for those of listening that don't know what that is, can you explain that?
Absolutely. Transcendental meditation. And you said you journaled this morning, and I try to journal every morning. I do morning pages, and as described by Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way. And transcendental meditation is form meditation. For me, as somebody who always thought meditation would be too challenging. First of all, it's such a big word, and it feels, not only does it feel, I always found it like an intimidating word. Like, oh, you got to be a special person to meditate. You have to somehow be very spiritual and in touch with. Actually, what it is like, it's a rope, it's a bridge, it's a lifeline to that kind of calmness, to that kind of peace. Because to me, when we're talking about things like big words, like spirituality, big words like Buddhism or Zen or Nirvana, any of those things, and not Nirvana the band, though also the band, but I think a simpler word is peace, and a simpler idea is inner peace. Because they're very hard to, it's hard to come by, especially if you want it. But I've always looked for those things that, I got to step back a second to answer the question, because like, why is it important to be able to find some sense of inner peace? Inner peace as opposed to, what we walk around with all the time, which is like some version of anxiety, concern, worry, fear. All of us, human beings, because we know we're mortal. We know that those we love are mortal, ultimately. We want to be good enough. We want to be strong enough. We want to be giving enough. But, so for me, anything I can do to be more centered and more at peace so that I can be better for the people I love, and I can show up the best version of myself when I engage with the people I love, when I engage with my work as a creative person, right? And so, I don't know, about 14 maybe years ago or so, I think, I was feeling the anxiety bubble up maybe a little more than usual. I was feeling what I would describe as like the physical manifestations of that, man. Like, whether it means your belly is acting weird, or whether it means you're wondering if you're short of breath, or some people have it like their neck hurts. Like, I was just feeling out of sorts, but not in the way that I needed a doctor, in the way that I needed to find a way to step back and create a little distance from like the loop in my mind and my essential self. And I'd been hearing about this idea of transcendental meditation for a long time. I read a book called Catching the Big Fish by David Lynch, who's the incredible filmmaker, and he's a lifelong meditator and credited meditation with really changing his life. And I'd heard about it from a few other people, and I investigated it.
Is that what Rick Rubin had read? Do you know?
I'm not sure if that's the book that he read. He didn't read it. He didn't do the audiobook of it. That's David Lynch does it himself. But
okay.
And David Lynch has this incredible voice. It's really awesome and great to hear him do it. But upon reading that book, and then I investigated and I went and I learned, and I'm somebody who it's hard for me to pay attention unless I'm fascinated by something. But the way that this meditation works, you kind of can't do it wrong. It's based on you repeating a kind of word sound to yourself over and over. But if you don't, if your thoughts come into it, that's fine. And I found that after I started doing it for a few months, every single day I did it, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon. I just found that, people always want to talk about, like, people always want to say, like, oh, this thing, it eliminated all worry, or it made me completely calm, or brought me no, nothing does that for anything more than little bits of time. But what I have found meditation does is reduces all of the ways that fear and anxiety show up in your body, in your brain. It just reduces it by something like 80%. I'm going to just say that number, but by like a really big amount. That doesn't mean I never feel worried or I never have existential dread. I'm a human, of course I do, but it means it shows up less frequently. It shows up at a lower number on the Richter scale of earthquake, and it is more easy to understand and control. And there are other, I just find that a little more centered, and a little more just kind of able to work my way through the world by taking these little 20-minute breaks twice a day. It's a simple thing. It just sounds big and complicated.
Because it's something that I've been hearing more and more about. I think that social media has opened up people to these new ideas of ways to be healthier physically, mentally.
Yeah.
And one of those things is meditation. And I'm a big Rick Rubin fan, and I know it's something he's been practicing for a long time. And I know that you've been doing it for quite a while. And I'm someone that struggles with really bad anxiety since I was a little kid, and it's always been one of those things where it's like looking for that way to shut your brain off almost, because it's so noisy all the time. And as a creative, and this is a question I have for you, I feel like a lot of creatives that I'm friends with struggle with anxiety, or maybe it's just everybody, but especially in the creative community, I find that people's brains somehow operate differently,
But cool, because I think part of it is if you're making stuff, you are listening, you've trained yourself, not consciously, but you've trained yourself to listen to the whispered voices in your head, because those whispered voices are what give you the gifts of this work that you do. But then those whispered voices, when you give them power, because you're like, ooh, it might say something good, I might hear a good line, I might get an idea, I might hear a melody, that whispered voice can also quietly be like, you're gonna die. So you don't want to listen to that part of it, or you're not good enough, like whatever that is. But so I
that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah,
I was just going to interrupt you because I have the voice in my head, and I think a lot of people do, that's like, you suck. That wasn't good enough, it could be a performance, it could be writing something, anything, or going back and maybe for you watching something you did, I don't know, but like that little voice inside your head that's always just telling you,
I
like,
know, but the
you're
training
not
is to
good
do it
enough.
you got to do it anyway. Look, I'm equal parts. Like I like all the mysticism, I really do, and I really dive into like the
But
writings of those
it's
people. But this is what I was gonna say.
yeah,
No, but I also listen to Jocko, who's just like, oh, you're scared? Good, do it anyway. Like the truth of the matter
yeah,
is, you got to show up and do the work. Like it, but there are tools, right? So there's meditation. I'll say I decided a long time ago that I needed to make rules for myself what it meant to have a good day, because otherwise I could just beat myself up. So like if I do my morning pages and I meditate and I do some kind of physical activity, exercise, and I spend some time with people that I love, that's a good day. I've done some work with the pages. That's it. Everything else gravy. And physical, I think you can't overestimate the benefits of physical exercise too, because it releases all sorts of things chemically that calm you down. But man, I'll send you. I'll send you this audiobook as a gift from me, and if you listen to it, and if when you do this David Lynch book, because he's this great artist, and he's really talking about being all racked with all sorts of things stopping him from doing the thing, and his fear and misery, and he was a very angry person. He would fly off the handle a lot, and he talks about how he was drawn to this form of meditation and what it does for him and what it does for him creatively. And if you dig it, then we can talk about how I'm happy to talk to you about how you can learn. But
yeah.
I would
I
start there
appreciate that.
because yeah, I'll send it to you as a gift. And it's
That's very
great,
sweet.
and because the audiobook's super cool. But like being an artist, man, is you're always jousting with, if it's not the industry, so the industry tells you you're not good enough, and then you get up, you're back up, and you're like, I am fucking good enough, and you go after it, and then you vanquish that for a moment, and you get the gig, or you show up at a round, and you do the job, and the people clap, and then you go home, and suddenly it's not the industry, but your body and your brain react to you getting doing everything you had to kind of to get adrenalized to decide you are good enough, and then as those chemicals recede, you start hearing these other messages, and that is everyone who's ever created pretty much has had to find a way to make friends with the voice that says you have no business doing this. Nobody's going to care about it. You're never going to be as good as Justin Townes Earl. You know, you're never gonna write a line and all you can do is pick up your pen or your guitar and start creating the next thing in the face of maybe even the knowledge that no one's going to care. You're not good enough, because you're not good enough wins if it stops you from the next chord progression. Not good enough loses if you finish the next song.
Yeah,
It's that
that's
simple.
right. I love that. That was a great way to put it, man. That leads me into my next question, which is rejection. And the first video I saw of you on TikTok was you talking about, I believe it was the first thing that you wrote.
Well, yeah, Stephan, I mean, the first movie script that David and I wrote was rejected by, well, a lot of great lessons came out of this, because one of the beliefs I got out of this was that the supposed experts and gatekeepers don't really know. That doesn't mean they're not important. If they're in a position to help you or hurt your progress, they matter. But it's really, I think, crucial to remember someone else will be in their seat. Someone else will be guarding the castle before you know it. And just because they're in the position doesn't mean that they actually know what's great and what's average and what sucks. And what people will like, because they've sometimes forgotten that they were at one time in the audience, and they forgot that the audience is full of people, and is not something that needs to be calculated about. But our first script got rejected by every agency in town in Hollywood. We were in New York. We didn't have these contacts, but we, through people, got it to be read. And because it was our first thing and I was really connected to the results, I wrote down what everybody said verbatim. Like, one guy said it's overwritten. Someone else said it's underwritten. I didn't know what those things meant then. I still don't. Someone else said, it feels too real. Someone else said it doesn't feel like this could have ever happened. And I wrote all these things down. It was sad. I was really upset that all these people rejected us. But I mean, every single talent agency, all the famous ones, CAA and William Morris, which is now WME, and ICM, and every one of them. And then this young manager, 24-year-old kid, started getting into like these small producer people, and through a series of things, the script got bought by an important film company. And that happened on a Monday, and I think on that Tuesday, Dave and I started getting these phone calls from the same people who rejected the script. And because I had written everything they said down and I was younger, I started just reading them, all their passes. I was like, well, how can you say it's great now? You said it was overwritten, sir. And they were like, oh, no, that was my assistant read it. And I didn't look at that. A reader looked at it. But what it taught me, and what happened basically was suddenly we got hot. And the moment we got hot, they all wanted to work with us. Before, we didn't matter. So then either they didn't pay attention, and so that really tells you something, right? Or they couldn't. Until someone else said this is good, they couldn't let their eyes believe it. But whatever it was, the lesson it gave me was, don't worry about it. When they reject you, you're allowed to feel hurt. You're allowed to feel frustrated. Then you take some time to let those feelings recede. Then you look at what they said and you say to yourself, is there validity in the specific criticism? If there is, address it. If there isn't, never think about it again and find the next person who might believe. And that has stood me very well. Meaning, it's not like you say they're definitely wrong, screw them. It's like you get to where your emotions aren't engaged and you look at it as objectively as you can and you take steps from that. But what you must also do is tell yourself that just because they're in the spot doesn't mean they know better than you. And that's been proven out over and over and over again. I mean, all you need to do is search for the rejection letter that you too got. And you can see that the biggest artists in the world that ever lived, the Beatles, were rejected by everybody. And even though that looks, that was a long time ago before people understood rock and roll. Yeah, but no. Because it happens over and over again. Luke Combs, if Luke Combs hadn't blown up himself on TikTok and all the rest of it, or whatever social media it was, would they have known? I don't know that they would have known. But the people know. The people knew. And that's what eventually has to happen. That doesn't mean if you're listening to this and you're an artist, a writer, and you're saying, yeah, but there's 6 publishers in town, and if all of them pass, and there's, 4 A&R people worth their salt. Yeah, that's really painful, and it is really painful. But it's also what the business is. Look, my favorite thing, and you can just watch this on Netflix, the Garth Brooks documentary. I mean, Major Bob brought Garth Brooks to every single record label in Nashville. He sat on their couches with his acoustic guitar, and he played Much Too Young, and they all rejected him. And then a few weeks later, he was at the Bluebird. He was supposed to go on late, but the artist that A&R was there to see an artist, that artist was late. The people at the Bluebird looked at Garth and they were like, well, you're here. Will you just go on? he went on, and one of those same people who had passed on him, now seeing him with people reacting to him, suddenly said, I'm a moron. You're going to be the biggest artist in the world. But that same person passed along with everybody else a week or 2 weeks before. And we all hear those things and somehow kind of dismiss them, but I don't dismiss them. I hold on to them, and I always have held on to them, because Garth Brooks was fully formed. Garth Brooks knew exactly who he was. You know, people can argue about whether Garth Brooks is great or not, but you can't argue about the fact that Garth knew something, and what he knew was, what I have to offer is what these folks want. And, you know, Garth knew enough to hear the dance and go, I want to sing that song, and he knew enough to get his buddy and find a way to write Much Too Young. And look, the first day he came to Nashville, he left, and he left for months, right? Because he got too scared. And then he got rejected. And then he became the biggest artist in the world. And it's important to hold on to that stuff, because all of us get rejected. You know, David Mamet, who's one of the greatest screenwriters who ever lived, and playwright, film director, and one of the smartest people writing about Hollywood in the 90s, really, and he has essay books that are incredible. He always says the person who makes it in show business is simply the person who refuses to go home. And there's a lot of truth in that. You know, you just got to refuse to go home. That doesn't mean don't listen to feedback. It doesn't mean don't listen to feedback. And look, I think songwriters have an advantage in that songwriters go into rooms and they interact with other people, and they learn to figure out how to navigate the kind of implied criticism of, hey, maybe there's another line, or maybe there's another chord we can go to, or, man, that title's close. And so we, as songwriters, we learn sort of like how to take that kind of feedback and make it something useful and not just get hurt. Because we've all had that feeling too, right? You've played a chorus and a write that you've just loved, and then you saw their faces and they were like, oh, it's kind of cool. And you were like, no, it's great. But then someone says something that makes it just slight different. You know, what if you go to the 6 there instead of the 4? What if that word, was grace instead of kindness? And suddenly the whole thing's elevated and much better. And yeah, you hear the thing you came in with. You're like, but I had that. You guys thought, but you know what? It's not the same thing. And suddenly it's better. And if we can all keep ourselves, and what that's really about is like trying to keep a bit of that ego out, have enough that no one's word is the law, but also keep it to a place where you're like, but if there's a better idea, if there's a bit of feedback that will help me improve, I'm open to it. In fact, I want it. I need it.
Yeah. It's good for people to know that you write quite a bit when you have the time with great writers in Nashville, artists, etc., some very prominent artists. So this is something you have firsthand experience with. And in terms of the rejection, and I think what you said was great. I heard recently, if you send the same thing to multiple people that are professionals and they all say the similar thing, then you might want to listen. But if everybody's saying something different, then, you may or may not want to let it go because it's one person's opinion, which I thought was kind of cool.
But I also think we sort of know, I'll say, like the industry could actually all think something and still be wrong, like the Garth Brooks thing where they all passed because they saw it in the wrong context, right? They saw Garth on their couch, and they weren't able in that moment to do the work of imagination to picture him in front of people, right? Somehow it didn't flip. But the thing is about feedback, which is slightly different than rejection feedback, right? If you can think of it as feedback, not rejection. But the thing about feedback is, as a creative person, when we hear feedback that has some truth in it, sometimes that might make us even more angry, like, no way. But the truth is, when the feedback is valid, somewhere in you, your spine tingles a little. And and that might not happen day one, but 5 days later, you're walking around and you're like, yeah, that bridge is a little bit, yeah, it's right. That can be better. And so, but if you don't, I will say though, if like, I wouldn't care if the whole industry, it's happened to me, right? The whole industry's rejected a script or an idea or a finished film in one case that Dave and I produced, and nobody want to buy it. And at first but if even after you kind of take that feedback and you walk around with it and you let the emotional response dissipate, you let the emotional response, almost like you got punched and then it's swollen, and you let the swelling go down. And for everybody, people heal at different rates. You know how your swelling goes down. I know how mine does. So you put the ice on it, you do whatever you had to do. And that could be 3 days, it could be 24 hours, it could be 3 weeks. But at some point, if you still, when there's no emotions to it, go, I don't think they're right. I think this thing is going to work. Well, I would take that just as seriously, because as long as you've as long as you've bleached out the emotional response, then I think because you also know, even when someone else is like, this is great, that little nagging voice that tells you it's not good enough yet, that's real too. And so that, not that you're not good enough, but the little voice that tells you the work. And Rick talks about that. There's two things, right? There's the nagging anxiety voice that says you're not good enough. Ignore that. But then there's the voice that even when you're enthusiastic is like, but did I make this good enough yet? Not me. Did I, who have the capacity? Did I, Stephan, who is good enough? Did I actually put everything I have? Did I bring all of that to bear on this? Can it be better? If the answer is yes, keep going. And if the answer is truly no, then ignore what everybody says about it and find a way to get it to the world. That's what's to serve me. That's the way that I've been able to navigate my way through this tricky maze.
I've been punched, and it's taken me 2-3 years to get what they said about a song, because I grew as a writer. So it's like,
yes,
I listen back and I'm like, that was a weak lyric. At the time, I thought it was the best thing in the world, but actually it wasn't. So
that's deep, man. That's also like when we're along that continuum of our own growth as a writer, right? So yeah, that makes sense.
Along that vein, because you were in the music business first, right?
I was an A&R person, yeah.
And can you talk a little about Tracy Chapman?
Sure. I mean, I will say that I'm the person who, I guess, saw Tracy and recognized how special she was, and worked with her in that first album and helped, get her signed and do that whole thing. And it's the same thing though, where everybody rejected her. I mean, we took her to these labels and nobody saw it, and finally we got one person. But and
that's, by the way, I mean, I think a lot of the younger folks listening might not know who Tracy Chapman is, but the song "Fast Car" that Luke Combs also just recently.
That's Tracy wrote that. Tracy wrote that song, and
that's the song that was on the record that you were pitching, correct?
That album, yes, the album that we ended up making, it's called just Tracy Chapman. Fast Car's on that record. But also at the time, I mean, that album went on to sell 13 million copies back then. I mean, it was the biggest album of the year and nominated for 6 or 7 Grammys. But
I can't imagine a better example of rejection.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I'm saying?
But I would say Fast Car she was on stage. She wasn't playing Fast Car in the beginning when I first saw her, but you didn't need to hear Fast Car, because that voice and those other songs, talking about a revolution and Baby Can I Hold You Tonight and For My Lover, all these songs that are like classic songs and that were the cornerstone of what she did, they all told you, if you were listening and you were allowing your heart to do the listening for you instead of your calculating brain about what you believe the market will bear. If you heard those melodies and those songs and her voice and her lyrics, you knew Fast Car was coming whether you heard Fast Car or not. That is there in this artist. And that's the job that these people are supposed to be able to do. And look, it doesn't always, I'll say, like, I signed a bunch of artists who became really big afterwards. So it doesn't always, like I'll say, I made an album with David Gray, Five for Fighting, all these people who it didn't happen on the first record. But I had tried to really train myself to look at where someone was, and that continuum we were talking about. And because I could always hear the signs of that kind of talent, the gift, the rigor of work. And but it was brutal. Like, the business side of the record business has always been brutal. And I knew my allegiance was with the writers. And in an executive job, you couldn't always act on that allegiance because you were put in situations where you're working for the company. And so you would make promises to artists that you couldn't keep. It wasn't even your job to keep them, right? I would promise records would be in the stores back when there were record stores, but I couldn't put the records in the stores. That's the sales people's responsibility, the promotion guys, to get it on the radio so the record store will order it. And so I hated every part of the disappointment that the artist writers would feel. I knew I was like what they were, I wanted to be that. I didn't want to be a performing musical artist, but I knew I was a writer. I knew I loved film and I loved television. I loved stories and writing, and had to find my way into being able to do that thing.
The big thing is where art meets commerce, and you have a lot of experience with that. And I think it's a very interesting topic, and something that I find myself butting heads, because there's the Rick Rubin approach. Back to him again, I'm just a huge fan, where he says consider the audience last, and he's not thinking about what labels are going to say and all of that. But then when living in Nashville, it's a town of, hey, we need to figure out how to monetize art. What is your suggestion or experience with that?
I think it's complicated. Obviously, I've had Rick and I know each other a really long time, and we're friends, and he's been on my podcast twice, and I'm, a huge admirer of him as a creative thinker and an artist and producer. And I'm really in league with him. Like, when Dave and I went in the basement and Row Rounders, it's like the world wanted a poker movie, man. That's why it got rejected. I always say calculate less, because there are some people who maybe understand what radio is going to want, let's say. But almost nobody really does. They only know what radio wanted last week. And that's not what radio is going to want 6 months from now. So you could just write the best song that you can write. Now, it works best probably like if somehow your instinct and what you love happens to be what they want and they love. But over and over, like, let's look at Brandi Carlile. Who would have ever known in the business side of the country music business that Brandi Carlile would be selling out stadiums?
Mm-hmm.
And, or that Jason Isbell's songs would be bigger on country radio than Jason Aldean's songs, as some country artist sings them. I mean, the fact that Cover Me Up is now a standard, like it's one of those songs written for Sinatra.
Yeah.
And If We Were Vampires is now cut by a million artists. And Jason Isbell never once gave 1 second's thought to country radio. Not 1 second did he think about that. That guy's trying to express what he's feeling now. He's incredibly rigorous if you've heard him talk about songwriting. I mean, He is so disciplined and rigorous and beats the shit out of himself to get the songs right for himself by his own North Star. And then he trusted that his North Star, and by the way, 10 albums later, right? The guy was writing incredible songs at 22 with the Drive-By Truckers. But somehow, those songs got enough fans that he could live. Not that he could live in any sort of a, not that he could live in any sort of a glamorous way or fancy way. I mean, you know, he was living in vans on the road, right? Until, honestly, he makes Southeastern this desperate record. I think his 5th solo record after the 3 he made with the Truckers. And because that record was just so good, like every single song was so good, it demanded attention. And then people passed it to other people. And then it ends up, you know, and then he starts selling out places and becoming who he became. But then this weird thing happens where songwriters show it to other songwriters and they're like, this guy might be the best living songwriter under 40 or whatever. And suddenly, what all artists working in the country music sphere go, I want to record a song by the best. This is the best song I've heard. And boom, you have a #1 record, right? So that's an unusual path, but there's lots of that. For me, there are many examples of that. And that, look, nobody gets a bigger smile on their face than I did when I first heard John Cougar, John D, or John 316, right? I heard that song and I was like, that is a perfect country song. That is a perfect radio country song. Like, it is a science. It's almost like mathematically designed to be the most perfect radio song in that moment.
Yeah.
And it makes me smile so wide because actually it doesn't feel calculated to me. Like, I've heard Shane tell the story. You know, that line, Josh, I think, wrote that line, but it was like in a verse. And then Shane was like, dude, that's the chorus. And then they refound it to the chorus and they knew they loved it. They sent it to Keith. He cut it like that day. He played it that night out that he heard it. And then, but that's like, that's that wild thing where suddenly those things all line up. But you hear the joy in that record, and that record doesn't sound bloodless. It doesn't sound like people trying to reach country radio. It sounds like people who just thought of something that made them smile. And it happens to also be kind of perfection, right? Now, it's not going to move me the same way a Brandy Clark song is going to move me. But the world of music is big enough to encompass all of it, I think. But also, man, I've never aimed in my life as a filmmaker and as a showrunner and as a screenwriter. I never aimed at the market. I didn't understand how. It doesn't work for me. I start with curiosity. I'm really curious about something. And that works with songs too, but I'm really curious about something. I'm fascinated. I start to become obsessed with it. I want to understand it. I want to learn about it. And from that, a story is going to show up. And I always believe that if David and I can somehow go through some kind of process where that fascination ends up kind of soaking the thing, if the thing becomes infused with that fascination that we have, that somehow you, the viewer or reader, you're going to feel that. And that by feeling that, it's gonna it will have that thing that demands attention, even if it's outside of what people would think people would want. You know?
Because people don't know what they want a lot of the time.
That Steve Jobs tells you that, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And it's cool, man, that you take that approach. And I think that's what draws me to you too, is a person is it's not like you're a, pretentious, successful man. I feel like you are a a hungry, creative being that has this desire to share, to learn, to grow, to make other people feel a feeling or ask a question, which is the whole point of being an artist, I think, in the first place.
100% right. 100% right. It's important to say, having a measure of commercial success, of having an audience, having people respond to the work. It's a lie to say that doesn't matter. You know, knowing that when I was able to feed my kids growing up, that mattered to me, of course. You know what I mean? Like, but the driving force was all the things you're saying, was that curiosity, fascination, obsession with telling these stories and the way people I mean, for me, it's like I hear a phrase, but it's important. I just want to say, like, yeah, when you say that about me, but I don't want to make it like it. I don't understand why you or someone, wants success along with it. Of course, we want people to know our work, and we want to be able to provide for our family, and like, and have like other, and and to, I being having a hit show for 7 years at 49, 50, when, I mean, believe me, it really mattered to me. But the great joy of that was writing Billions. Like, if I had to compare it all, sitting in that room when we were able to really, I can remember these days of being alone, and David was in one room and I was in the other room, and we were writing scenes. So I'm alone in this room and writing about these people. And I can remember I was putting the script together and going through it and then fixing it. And I just remember being so lost in it and in the world of it that I was like floating. And I was so engaged too at the same time. And knowing, okay, this has the real in it. That is the thing that fires everything else. It's what allows for that. Like, that feeling is why I was able to pay my mortgage off. Like, it's because of that. It's not because I thought, oh, this is how I'm going to get to a place where my work is... No. The feeling of being so engaged with something and working so hard to realize it. Like, not just being engaged in it and obsessed, but actually not good enough yet. We can make this better. Not that it stops you from doing the work, right? Not, oh no, I'm not good enough. The work won't be good enough, so I'm not even going to write. I'm saying we do a draft, read it. Why isn't it good enough yet? Okay, this part. What do we need? How do we, not why isn't it good enough yet that we can sell it? Not why isn't it good enough yet that the market, why is it not yet achieving that feeling that I know is there? And then the fight to get that to happen. That thing, because I remember when we got that thing and we finished it, I remember knowing, oh yeah, we did it. This is that. You only get that feeling a few times in your life. But when you do, it's worth the rest of it. And that feeling is what led to being able to be this dude sitting here in an office that's, and being able to carve the time in my day to talk to my friend Stephan on his podcast, because my own time is I'm my own boss, like all that stuff. That's from that feeling that I've had a few times in my life. That's from going in a basement with Dave when we both had day jobs, and when he was a bartender, he had a night job, but we both had these jobs. We just got up extra early and we wrote for 2 hours a day, and that became Rounders. And there was no cause to believe that would work. But those 2 hours a day, man, I felt so alive that they floated me for the rest of the day.
Yeah. Which was a huge film with Matt Damon.
Yeah, Matt and Edward Norton, John Malkovich. It was not a success in the theaters, but then now, it over those 30 years, it became a really big deal to people. And it gave us a career because we had a movie made with big movie stars,
Yeah, I love what you just said. You were never thinking about the office, or the carving out time or the freedom. It was the purity of the art. And I think that's what we need to really focus on as creatives, is that voice, not the what are they going to think? What is so-and-so going to think?
Now, that doesn't mean I'll say this, which you'll understand because of what you do every day, but that doesn't mean that like you ignore the genre you're in. And so if you're going to get together with people to write a pitch for Kenny Chesney, then what should be in your head in the creative thing is like Kenny Chesney music. And that's not the time to be writing a Stephan song. That's the time to be bringing the best of yourself, of what you think is cool and great, of what you'd want to hear Kenny Chesney sing. Not what you'd self-indulgently want to hear Kenny Chesney sing if he wasn't Kenny Chesney. But I mean, what would make me happy to hear on a Kenny Chesney record? That Kenny Chesney that is the magic, right? So when I'm hired to write Ocean's 13 with David, when we're hired to write Ocean's 13, I'm trying to make the coolest Ocean's 13 movie that I want to see. But I'm not going to try to change Danny Ocean from Danny Ocean into, Poindexter, right? Danny Ocean's Danny Ocean. But I'm able to put in that movie Danny Ocean and Rusty watching Oprah. And that's something right out of that was David walking in on me watching Oprah and tearing up. But we were able to take those characters and literally put a scene from our lives in that movie in a way that fit the movie. So that movie somehow is very personal, even though it's like the biggest kind of Hollywood movie you could make. But we didn't break with what the genre was. We just made ourselves laugh and smile within the world. We understood, okay, we're working in this world. Within this world has some parameters. Within those parameters, we can do anything that we want. Within these parameters, we can make ourselves really happy. Or don't take that job. There are people who shouldn't go into a room to write a song for Kenny Chesney. But most of us have had a time in our lives that we put on one of his albums and loved it. And if we can find that in ourselves, what we loved, not, oh, this is a smart move. The moment you start thinking, oh, smart move, you're dead. Instead, for me, I want to be thinking, oh, this is exciting. I get to, imagine what it would feel like to hear, Kenny Chesney coming out of my speakers. But imagine what it would feel like if Buddy Cannon and Kenny decided that this song was cool. And that's for me, a better place to come from. Now, again, there are people who could do the other thing, but I don't understand it. I don't know how.
I love that, man. A couple more questions for you before we wrap up, and I really appreciate your time. First off, you do tell us a little about your podcast, because I would love for people. It's a great podcast, and you have a variety of different people on it, which I think is very cool.
Yeah, I think it's called The Moment with Brian Koppelman, and it's the same thing, really. It's like having conversations with people whose work or life, their approach fascinates me. And the Quentin Tarantino episode, I think, is excellent and not a bad place to start. But I also think if you're someone who's interested in songwriting, I've had a bunch of great songwriters on there, including Randy Clark and Shane McAnally and Luke Dick.
You definitely need to subscribe to Brian's podcast, The Moment, because he has amazing guests. So at the end of the day, this is what I wrote here in my journal, because I was asking myself this is a question for me. At the end of the day, what defines you? And I'm going to ask you that question, because it's somewhat philosophical, right? But something that you said, you know what a good day is, but I feel like what defines you? Well,
you as a you'll know, like people if you don't have kids, you until you have kids, you can't really understand it. But the truth is that, I mean, last night my son's 28, and we went out to a ball game, and it, all the things that Amy and I our whole lives have done with our children, raising our kids. All I would have wanted really was that they're 24 and 28, the two of them, the kids, that they'd want to go spending a Tuesday night hanging out with their old man and talking and telling them about their life. And I remember at the game last night, like leaving the game, and it's funny when you have these little kids. I'm sure you can't fathom it, but it's funny to me. We get out of the Madison Square Garden last night, and Sammy's like, "Let me find you a cab, Dad." And he took care of me. He wanted to make sure he got me safely off in a taxi, and he opened the cab. He ran down a cab and put me in the cab and sent me off. And normally I don't notice. You don't notice. You're just living your life, but I noticed it, and I was like, all right, that is kind of what defines me, is but part of it ties into this, which is my kids saw. I never hid from my children the difficulties of choosing a path that was in the arts and relied upon going into a room and coming up with something that you cared about. And there were Christmas times when we raised the kids in New York City, and they were in schools with a lot of people who were really fortunate from a financial standpoint. And we're great. I'm not going to tell some sob story like I was lucky. I always did pretty well, but not compared to those people. And also, there were years where I made an independent movie and made very, very not enough money to pay not enough money that I didn't have to basically run through everything we'd saved. And there were a lot of Christmas vacations that we stayed in New York. There were a lot of times when it was very clear that the path, Amy's a novelist and a filmmaker. It's like the path we chose was unconventional, but was honest, and that we were going to take care of them, make sure they were safe and protected, but that doing this work our way was really important to us. And our kids saw that, and I think it was formative in a way. And so I don't know, like it's all one thing to me. And I'd say just trying to live truthfully and trying to not lie to myself and not lie to my loved ones was like a real cornerstone of that. And I don't mean lie about your whereabouts. I mean just being truthful about what it means to be a person alive in the world with all its frailty and all of the beauty of it. And that's a lot to say, but it's a big question that you asked, so that's, I think, maybe the best I can do with it.
That's a beautiful answer. Everything changed for us. My son will be, we're about 10 days away from him turning 1. And when we had him, it changed everything for me and my perspective on life. And I was like, you know what? I don't care if I'm ever famous or if I have to shovel asphalt. It kind of changed my whole perspective on life. And you're right. And I'm not where you're at. I don't have the luxury of, and it's nice because I get to enjoy the growing process. But me and my dad sit down and we do what you did with your son. We watched the Niners game on Sunday. And it's just those moments that I think that I'm having even now, watching him develop, that make life worth it,
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, you will, and it is, it's the whole thing, man. And it is all one thing. It's been a pleasure getting to speak with you, Stephan, and I'm honored to be here visiting with you on this. And man, I can't wait to hear the next bunch of songs you write.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the work that you've done and the impact that you have on people, for your podcast, educating people, and you just giving back to the world and to creatives in general. I mean, it's something that we need. We need the people that say, I got rejected, but I kept going and it worked, and you can do it too. So don't
Yes.
stop, because so often it's like, man, should I just give up, you know? And so I really appreciate that. So thank you, Brian.
My pleasure. I'll speak with you soon.
All right. See ya.
Be well. Bye.
Bye.